The 3 words that echoed in the cavernous hall of JFK's Terminal 4 were delivered with the flat, unyielding finality of a prison sentence. "You're not boarding." They were aimed at Dr. Alani Sterling, a woman whose brilliance was about to reshape the future of medicine. She stood at the first-class check-in, holding a ticket worth more than the agent's monthly salary. Her destination, a world-changing conference in Geneva. But in that moment, none of her achievements mattered. All the agent saw was a black woman she had decided did not belong. Little did she know, she wasn't just denying a passenger a seat. She was grounding a titan, and the consequences would be far more turbulent than any flight. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport thrummed with a familiar, chaotic energy. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the anxious chatter of 1,000 different journeys. For Dr. Alani Sterling, it was merely a sterile corridor between 2 critical points in her life, her state-of-the-art biotech lab in New York and a high-stakes pharmaceutical summit in Geneva. At 42, Alani carried an aura of quiet, formidable intelligence. Her bespoke charcoal grey pantsuit was understated, her leather tote held patent files worth billions, and her mind was already in Switzerland, strategizing the final phase negotiations for her company's revolutionary Alzheimer's treatment, NeuroClarity. She approached the Transatlantic Airways first-class check-in counter, a serene island in the sea of airport madness. Behind the gleaming mahogany desk sat a woman whose name tag read Carla Jenkins. Carla was in her late 50s, with a helmet of stiff blonde hair and a gaze that seemed permanently set to disapprove. She was a career gate agent, a gatekeeper who derived a sliver of power from her ability to grant or deny passage. "Good morning," Alani said, placing her passport and ticket on the counter. Her voice was calm and melodic. Carla didn't return the greeting. She picked up the passport with 2 fingers, as if it were something distasteful. She flicked it open, her eyes darting from the photo to Alani's face and back again. A small, sour purse formed on her lips. "Geneva," Carla stated, her tone flat. She began to type with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each keystroke a tiny tap of judgment. The silence stretched. Other passengers were being processed with brisk efficiency at the adjacent counters, but Alani's lane had become a pocket of stillness. "Is there a problem?" Alani asked, her patience beginning to thin. "The system is flagging your reservation," Carla said, not looking up from her screen. The excuse was as old as the airline industry itself, a vague, unchallengeable phantom in the machine. "A flag? For what reason?" Alani pressed, keeping her voice even. "The ticket was booked by my corporate office, Amaranthine Labs, over a month ago." Carla's eyes finally lifted. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they held a chilling blend of condescension and suspicion. Sometimes reservations made through third-party corporate bookers have discrepancies. "I need to see the credit card used for the purchase." This was irregular, but Alani complied, retrieving the sleek, black corporate Amex from her wallet. "This is the card. It's in the company's name, of course. My name is on it as the authorized executive." Carla took the card. She scrutinized it, front and back, holding it up to the light as if expecting it to be a cheap forgery. She swiped it. The machine beeped affirmatively. A flicker of disappointment crossed Carla's face before it was replaced by a mask of bureaucratic neutrality. "The card is valid," she admitted grudgingly. However, the security flag on the ticket itself remains. It requires a supervisor's override, and Supervisor David Chen is currently handling a security issue at Gate B42. She delivered this information with a hint of satisfaction. "You'll have to step aside and wait." "Step aside for how long?" Alani asked, gesturing to the line now forming behind her. My flight board's in 40 minutes. As long as it takes, Carla replied, her voice acquiring a sharp edge. She then looked past Alani to the man behind her, a ruddy-faced man in a golf shirt. Sir, I can help you right here. The humiliation was a hot flash that prickled Alani's skin. She was being dismissed, publicly sidelined. She stood her ground. I don't think you understand. I am not waiting indefinitely. My position is confirmed, my ticket is paid for, and my identity is verified. There is no legitimate reason to deny me check-in. Carla's face hardened. The veneer of customer service cracked, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. Ma'am, she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper, so only Alani could hear. People like you often try to fly on tickets that don't belong to them. This is a standard security protocol. Now please step aside, or I will call Port Authority police. The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. People like you. The words were a slap, echoing decades of slights and dismissals she thought her success had insulated her from. But here it was, in a first-class line at JFK, as raw and potent as ever. Alani felt a glacial calm descend over her. The anger was there, a white-hot nova in her chest, but she contained it. She had learned long ago that reacting with overt anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. It would only validate the stereotype in Carla's mind. Instead, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. I see, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She took a step back from the counter, pulling out her phone. The battle at this desk was lost, but the war was just beginning. Alani did not move to the designated waiting area, a cold, sterile space with plastic chairs. Instead, she stood a few feet away from the counter, a silent, powerful effigy of defiance. She could feel the stares of other passengers. Some were sympathetic, others annoyed by the delay, and a few, she noted with a familiar pang, looked at her with the same suspicion as Carla. They saw her, a black woman in an expensive suit, and their minds filled in a narrative of fraud or trouble. Carla, meanwhile, reveled in her small victory. She processed the next passenger with an exaggerated smile and theatrical efficiency, occasionally glancing at Alani with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She was making a point. This is my domain. Here I am the one in charge. The supervisor, David Chen, a harried-looking man in his 30s, finally appeared after 15 long minutes. Carla flagged him down, launching into a hushed but animated explanation, gesturing toward Alani. David listened, his brow furrowed, then approached Alani with an air of weary apology. Dr. Sterling, I'm David Chen, the floor supervisor. I apologize for the delay. Carla mentioned a security flag on your ticket. She did, Alani replied, her voice like ice. She also implied I was a thief and threatened to call the police. I'd like to know what this flag specifically pertains to. David paled slightly. Threatened? Look, I'm sure it was a misunderstanding. These system flags can be triggered by anything. A last-minute seat change, a frequent flyer number mismatch. Let me just take a look. He went behind the counter, gently nudging Carla aside. His typing was much faster, his expression focused. After a moment, he looked up, a mask of confusion on his face. I don't see any active security flag, Dr. Sterling. There's a note of a verification check, but it was cleared automatically 10 minutes ago. Carla should have seen that. He turned to Carla, his voice now holding a note of sternness. Carla, the flag is clear. You can check her in. Carla's face soured. She had been caught. The system must have just updated, she mumbled, refusing to make eye contact with Alani. It was showing red just a minute ago. Fine, Alani said, stepping forward once more. "Let's proceed. The flight boards in less than 20 minutes now." Carla took a deep breath, her resentment palpable. She began to process the ticket again, but with a petty, deliberate slowness. She weighed the carry-on, even though it was clearly within limits. She examined the passport again. Finally, she slid a boarding pass onto the counter, but kept her hand on it. "Unfortunately," she said, the smugness returning to her voice. While the supervisor was on his way, boarding for Zone 1 was completed, and it appears the flight is now fully booked. We've had to gate-check your carry-on, and due to a last-minute aircraft swap, the overhead bins in first class are smaller. Your seat assignment has also been shifted. You're now in 14B. Alani stared at her. 14B was a middle seat in premium economy. She had paid nearly $12,000 for a first-class lie-flat suite. This wasn't a mistake. It was a targeted act of malice. It was Carla's final, vindictive move to put Alani in her place. "You gave my seat away," Alani stated, the words falling like chips of ice. "The system automatically reassigns seats when a passenger hasn't checked in by the cutoff," Carla recited, a perfectly rehearsed line. "You were in a security hold. It's unfortunate, but it's policy." David Chen looked horrified. "Carla, what did you do? We could have held the seat for 5 minutes. Policy is policy, David." She snapped back, emboldened now. That was it. That was the final line. Alani looked at Carla, then at the helpless supervisor. She looked at the boarding pass for a middle seat she had no intention of ever sitting in. She picked up her passport from the counter, leaving the boarding pass untouched. She gave a small, humorless smile. "You know what? Don't worry about it," she said, her voice suddenly light. "Keep the seat. Give it to someone who needs it." She turned to David. "I would like your full name and employee number, and hers as well." David quickly provided his, but Carla hesitated. "It's on my name tag," she said defiantly. "I want to be sure I get it right for my formal complaint," Alani said sweetly. "Carla Jenkins. Got it." Then she turned and walked away from the counter, not towards the security gate, but back towards the main concourse. Her retreat looked like a surrender. Carla smirked, watching her go, convinced she had won. She had successfully humbled the arrogant woman in the fancy suit. She had protected the sanctity of her first-class cabin. Alani walked until she was out of sight of the check-in desk. She stopped, took a deep, steadying breath, and unlocked her phone. She didn't call customer service. She didn't call her corporate travel agent. She scrolled to a single contact saved under the name Mikhail. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Mikhail," Alani said, her voice now stripped of all emotion, replaced by cold command. "It's Alani. We have a change of plans. Get the G700 ready. Destination is Geneva. File the flight plan for an immediate departure. And Mikhail." "Yes, Dr. Sterling," came the crisp, Russian-accented reply. "Have them park it where the whole of Terminal 4 can see it." While Alani made her call, Carla Jenkins was basking in the afterglow of her perceived victory. She felt a surge of righteous power. She had enforced the rules, maintained order, and put someone she deemed an imposter back in their place. Her supervisor, David, was still giving her a stern lecture about protocol and customer discretion, but Carla tuned him out. In her mind, David was weak, a cog who didn't understand the subtle art of gatekeeping. She could be an executive VIP, Carla. Her company, Amaranthine Labs, has a multi-million-dollar corporate account with us, David hissed, trying to keep his voice down. "And I'm supposed to know that how?" Carla retorted. She looked suspicious. "My instincts are usually right." Her instincts were a cocktail of ingrained bias and personal bitterness, fermented over 30 years of watching people jet off to lives she could only dream of. Meanwhile, Alani was being escorted through a discreet side door by a representative from a private aviation service, bypassing the chaos of the main security lines entirely. Within minutes, she was in the hushed, opulent sanctuary of the Signature Flight Support FBO, a private terminal for the ultra-wealthy. The air here smelled of leather and fresh coffee, not recycled cabin air and stress. "Mikhail sends his apologies he couldn't greet you personally, Dr. Sterling," the concierge said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "He is overseeing the final preparations. Your Gulfstream will be ready for taxi in 15 minutes. Your flight crew is already on board." Alani simply nodded, sinking into a plush armchair that overlooked the vast expanse of the airfield. She didn't need apologies. She needed efficiency. And Mikhail, her chief pilot and head of her personal flight department, was the epitome of it. Back in Terminal 4, Carla was just finishing up with another passenger when a sudden commotion rippled through the area near the large floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. People were pointing, their phones suddenly raised to take pictures. "What's going on now?" Carla grumbled, craning her neck to see. David walked over to the window, his expression curious. Then his jaw went slack. "Oh my God," he whispered. Pushing her way through the small crowd, Carla peered out. What she saw made her blood run cold. Out on the tarmac, a vision of impossible wealth and power was taxiing into position. It was a private jet, but it wasn't just any private jet. It was a Gulfstream G1100, the pinnacle of corporate aviation, a sleek, white dart of a machine worth over $75 million. Its twin Rolls-Royce engines hummed with a quiet power that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the terminal. But it wasn't just the plane's existence that was shocking. It was its position. Instead of staying in the designated private aviation area, it was slowly, majestically, pulling onto a hard stand directly in front of Gate B-23, the very gate the Geneva flight was departing from. It was a move so audacious, so contrary to all airport protocol, that it could only have been authorized by the highest levels of airport operations. The plane's tail was emblazoned with a simple, elegant registration number, N777AS. David Chen, who had a better understanding of the aviation world, did the math in his head. "And for USA, as for..." He looked back at his computer screen where Dr. Alani Sterling's profile was still open. Alani Sterling. AS. He felt sick. "Carla," he said, his voice a strangled croak. "What have you done?" Carla was still staring, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. It couldn't be. It was just a coincidence. A celebrity, perhaps. A head of state. But then, a black, executive Escalade with airport authority markings drove onto the tarmac and pulled up to the base of the jet's stairs. The passenger door opened. Out stepped a lone figure, a woman in a charcoal grey pantsuit. Even from this distance, the silhouette was unmistakable. Dr. Alani Sterling walked calmly up the stairs, her leather tote in hand. She didn't look back at the terminal. She didn't have to. At the top of the stairs, a uniformed pilot greeted her with a crisp salute. She disappeared into the gleaming fuselage. The door hissed shut. A collective gasp went through the crowd at the window. The man in the golf shirt whom Carla had so eagerly helped turned to his wife and said, "Well, I guess she found another flight." Carla Jenkins felt the floor drop out from under her. The smugness, the victory, the righteous indignation. It all evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, cold terror. The woman she had dismissed, humiliated, and tried to cram into a middle seat was not a fraud. She was the owner of that $75 million middle finger to the entire airline, currently parked on their runway. N777 Alani Sterling. Her face, which had been a mask of contemptuous authority just minutes earlier, was now a canvas of dawning horror. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "Corporate HQ is calling my cell. They want to talk to you. Now." The Gulfstream's engines spooled up, their powerful whine cutting through the terminal glass. As the Transatlantic Airways Flight 112 to Geneva was beginning its final boarding call, the G700 began its smooth, powerful journey to the main runway. It would be in the air long before the commercial flight even pushed back from the gate. Carla Jenkins watched it go, feeling not just like she had made a mistake, but like she had just ended her entire life. The moment the door of the Gulfstream closed behind Alani, the world outside ceased to matter. The cabin was an oasis of tranquility, decorated in muted tones of cream and silver. The scent of polished wood and soft leather replaced the airport's stale air. A flight attendant, a woman named Anya, greeted her with a warm smile and a flute of chilled champagne. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Sterling," Anya said. "Mikhail advises we have a clear taxiway. We should be airborne in 7 minutes. Is there anything I can get for you before takeoff?" "Just water for now, Anya." "Thank you," Alani replied, sinking into a plush leather seat that was larger and more comfortable than the entire row of seats on the commercial flight. She opened her laptop. The humiliation had been infuriating, but she was a pragmatist. She compartmentalized the anger and refocused on the multi-billion-dollar reason for her trip. The incident was a distraction, an ugly one, but one that could be dealt with later, and with surgical precision. On the ground, however, the shockwave from her departure was just beginning to propagate. In the Transatlantic Airways corporate headquarters in Chicago, Vice President of North American Operations, Richard Hayes, was in the middle of a budget meeting when his assistant burst in, phone in hand, her face ashen. "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have the director of JFK operations on line 1. He says it's a code red." A code red was reserved for hijackings, crashes, or catastrophic security breaches. Hayes excused himself and took the call in his office. "This better be good, Mark," he barked into the receiver. "Richard, we have a situation," the JFK director said, his voice strained. "Dr. Alani Sterling of Amaranthine Labs was just denied boarding on Flight 112 to Geneva." Richard Hayes felt a cold pit form in his stomach. He didn't just know the name, he feared it. Amaranthine Labs wasn't just a corporate account, it was their largest corporate account, spending north of $20 million a year on premium travel for their executives and scientists. Alani Sterling was their founder and CEO, a titan of the biotech industry, and notoriously private. "Denied boarding? On what grounds?" Hayes demanded. An agent at the counter, a Carla Jenkins, flagged her for a security check and then claimed her seat was given away due to the delay. Hayes pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a migraine bloom behind his eyes. "Please tell me this is a joke, Mark." "I wish it were. That's not the worst part." Dr. Sterling then had her private aircraft, a Gulfstream G700, taxi to the commercial gate to pick her up. She's in the air as we speak, on her way to Geneva. Silence. Richard Hayes was a man who had dealt with engine failures over the Atlantic and Union strikes that grounded entire fleets. But this was different. This wasn't an operational failure. It was a self-inflicted public relations apocalypse. A private jet on a commercial hardstand was an unprecedented power move. It was a message. "Who the hell is Carla Jenkins?" Hayes roared. "I want her full file on my desk in 5 minutes. I want every single piece of CCTV footage from that check-in counter. I want sworn statements from every employee who witnessed the interaction, starting with the supervisor, David Chen. Is Jenkins still on the floor? She's been pulled into the station manager's office. She's not taking it well. I don't give a damn how she's taking it. Hayes slammed his fist on his desk. This isn't just about one VIP. This is about a woman who was publicly humiliated at our counter for no reason in this day and age. Do you have any idea how this is going to play out when it hits the news? And it will hit the news. He was already thinking ahead, a cascade of disastrous scenarios flooding his mind. Boycotts, corporate account cancellations, viral videos, the stock price tumbling. His mind raced. Get our legal team on the line. I need to call Alani Sterling's office. We need to get ahead of this. A full, unreserved apology is the bare minimum. A refund is insultingly insufficient. We need to make this right, and we need to do it an hour ago. He hung up the phone, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. He looked out his skyscraper window at the Chicago skyline. For years, he'd managed crises involving machines and logistics. But the damage a single person, armed with a little bit of authority and a mountain of prejudice, could inflict on a multi-billion-dollar global corporation was something no manual could prepare him for. Back at JFK, Carla Jenkins sat in a small, windowless office opposite a grim-faced station manager. The bravado she had felt just an hour ago was gone, replaced by a quivering, defensive panic. I was following protocol, she kept repeating, her voice shrill. The system flagged her. It was a security issue. The system cleared her, Carla, the manager said, his voice weary. And you gave away a confirmed, paid-for first-class seat. Then you tried to put her in a middle seat in the back. Do you have any idea who that woman was? Carla just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. The reality was crashing down on her, not like a wave, but like a tsunami. She hadn't just angered a passenger. She had poked a sleeping dragon, and the entire corporate empire was now scrambling to escape the fire. As the Gulfstream G700 sliced through the stratosphere at 45,000 feet, Alani Sterling finalized the last details of her presentation. The incident at JFK was a walled-off section of her mind, a problem to be delegated and solved. As soon as she was in the air, she had made a second call, this one to Marcus Thorne, the lead counsel for Amaranthine Labs and her personal attorney for over a decade. Marcus was everything one could want in a lawyer, impeccably dressed, relentlessly sharp, and possessed of a moral compass that pointed firmly towards justice and his client's best interests. He listened without interruption as Alani recounted the events, his silence a sign of his mind, processing every detail, every angle, every potential legal recourse. Carla Jenkins and David Chen, he repeated when she finished. Transatlantic Airways. I see. Alani, you focus on your deal in Geneva. Close it. Change the world. Let me handle the mess on the ground. I want you to know, we will not be seeking a simple apology and a travel voucher. I didn't expect we would be, Marcus, Alani said. No, Marcus continued, a steely edge to his voice. This was not poor customer service. This was a pattern of behavior enabled by a system. We're going to address the system. I'll have a team pull every complaint ever filed against this airline for racial bias. We'll request the employee files for Jenkins and Chen. We'll subpoena the security footage. By the time you land in Geneva, Transatlantic's CEO will know my name. And by the end of the week, he'll wish he'd never heard it. The call ended, and Alani felt the last vestiges of the incident's emotional residue dissipate. It was now in Marcus's hands, and Marcus Thorne didn't lose. On the ground, that unseen machinery of consequence was already grinding into motion. In the Chicago headquarters of Transatlantic, Richard Hayes was in full crisis management mode. The legal department was in lockdown. The PR team was drafting statements of profound apology, each one more groveling than the last. An internal affairs team, usually reserved for investigating employee theft or fraud, was dispatched to JFK with a single urgent mandate: dissect the Carla Jenkins incident down to the atomic level. The lead investigator was a man named Frank Miller, a former FBI agent with a reputation for being thorough and utterly impartial. He arrived at JFK that afternoon and set up in a conference room. His first interview was with David Chen. David, terrified for his job, told Miller everything, holding nothing back. He described Carla's history of being difficult, especially with passengers of color who flew in premium cabins. He admitted that he and other supervisors had often let it slide, chalking it up to Carla being Carla, writing off her behavior with verbal warnings that were never documented. It was easier than dealing with the union paperwork required for a formal reprimand. "So you're telling me," Miller said, his voice calm but his eyes piercing, "that you were aware Ms. Jenkins exhibited a pattern of biased behavior, but you failed to formally document it or escalate it to HR." David swallowed hard. Yes, I suppose so. I never thought it would lead to this. It always leads to this, Mr. Chen," Miller said coolly, "sooner or later." Next came Carla Jenkins. She entered the room flanked by a union representative, her demeanor now a mix of tearful victimhood and belligerent defiance. She stuck to her story: the system flag, the security protocol, the policy on check-in cut-offs. Miller let her talk, occasionally asking a clarifying question. Then he played the CCTV footage on a large monitor. The footage had no audio, but the visual story was damning. It showed Alani, calm and polite. It showed Carla's dismissive body language, her sneer, her triumphant expression as she processed the next passenger while Alani was forced to wait. It showed her heated exchange with David and the final vindictive act of sliding the useless boarding pass across the counter. "Ms. Jenkins," Miller said, pausing the video on a close-up of Carla's smug face. "You claim you were following protocol, but this footage seems to show a personal satisfaction in the outcome. Can you explain that?" "I was under stress. She was being difficult," Carla insisted, her voice rising. "She had an attitude." "What I see," Miller countered, "is a passenger standing her ground when her rights were being violated. And I see an employee using company policy as a weapon. Let's talk about your history, Ms. Jenkins." Miller's team had already done a deep dive. They found a surprising number of customer complaints against Carla over the years. Most were from minority passengers, and all of them had been resolved by David Chen with a form letter apology and a $50 travel voucher, with no official record placed in Carla's file. But they also found something else, something David didn't know about. "We've been monitoring internal systems for fraud," Miller said, changing topics abruptly. "And your employee ID has been flagged multiple times for issuing first-class upgrade vouchers that were never assigned to a passenger complaint. Oddly, many of these vouchers were later used by people who all live in the same town as your sister in New Jersey. Can you explain that?" The color drained from Carla's face. The union rep immediately spoke up. "My client will not be answering any questions about unsubstantiated allegations of fraud." "They won't be unsubstantiated for long," Miller said, closing his notebook. "We're done here. Ms. Jenkins, you are suspended with pay, pending the outcome of this investigation. You'll surrender your airport ID and be escorted from the premises." Carla was stunned into silence. Suspension was just the beginning. She was being investigated for racism, and now for theft. The fortress of rules and seniority she had built around herself for 30 years had crumbled to dust in a single afternoon. As 2 security guards arrived to walk her out, She finally understood. She had picked a fight with the wrong woman, and now a world of trouble she couldn't even comprehend was coming for her. The days that followed were a slow-motion demolition of Carla Jenkins' life. The suspension felt like a temporary reprieve, but the silence from the airline was deafening. She spent her time at home, in her modest suburban tract house, watching the news and jumping every time the phone rang. She told her husband a sanitized version of the story, that a difficult VIP passenger had filed an unfair complaint and that the company was just going through the motions. But in the quiet hours of the night, the image of that Gulfstream jet haunted her. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was waging a silent, devastatingly effective war against Transatlantic Airways. His first letter to the CEO was not a threat, but a calm, factual statement of intent. It detailed the incident, cited federal regulations against discriminatory practices by air carriers, and formally requested the preservation of all evidence. It also contained a single, chilling sentence. Dr. Sterling has, for the moment, instructed us to resolve this matter discreetly and directly, with the goal of ensuring no other passenger suffers such indignities. We trust you will appreciate the opportunity. The CEO, a man named Thomas Fletcher, understood the subtext perfectly. Handle this now, or we will go public and bury you. The internal investigation, led by Frank Miller, moved with terrifying speed. They cross-referenced the serial numbers of the upgrade vouchers Carla had stolen with online resale sites. They found a seller on eBay, operating under the username Jersey Girl Flies, who had been selling transatlantic first-class upgrades for the past 2 years for $500 a pop. The PayPal account linked to the seller was registered to Carla's sister. The financial trail was laughably simple to follow. They had her. The theft amounted to over $80,000 in value. Miller's team also interviewed other check-in agents, promising anonymity. The stories poured out. They spoke of Carla's special rules for certain passengers, her frequent use of condescending language, and her knack for finding non-existent problems in the reservations of Black, Hispanic, and Asian travelers in premium cabins. One junior agent tearfully admitted that Carla had once told her to always double-check the credit cards of the urban ones. They're usually stolen. The case against Carla was no longer just about one incident. It was about a deeply rooted pattern of prejudice and criminality. The case against her supervisor, David Chen, was one of gross negligence and enablement. 2 weeks after the incident, Carla received a registered letter. It was her termination notice. The official reason cited was violation of company code of conduct and misappropriation of company assets. Her 3 decades of service, her pension, her flight benefits, all gone. The next day, 2 plainclothes detectives from the Port Authority Police Department showed up at her door. They had a warrant. They questioned her about the stolen vouchers. Her blustering denials crumbled when they presented her with bank statements from her sister's account showing regular transfers to her own. She was arrested and charged with grand larceny and computer fraud. The news of her arrest broke on a local New York news affiliate and was quickly picked up by national outlets. The story was irresistible. Airline agent fired and arrested after humiliating biotech CEO. Suddenly, Carla's name and face were everywhere. The narrative wasn't just about a rude employee. It was a potent parable about racism, class, and comeuppance in modern America. Her neighbors whispered when she walked to her car. Her husband, a quiet man who had believed her sanitized story, was now confronted with the ugly truth of her prejudice and the reality of her crime. Their marriage, already strained by financial trouble, began to fracture. David Chen was also fired. His termination letter cited his failure to supervise and his negligence in addressing repeated complaints, which had exposed the company to significant legal and reputational risk. He was not charged with a crime, but in the close-knit aviation industry, he was blacklisted. No other major airline would touch him. For Transatlantic Airways, the bleeding was just beginning. Marcus Thorne, armed with the findings of the internal investigation, which he had obtained through legal channels, now had immense leverage. He arranged a meeting with CEO Thomas Fletcher. In a sterile boardroom high above the Chicago River, Fletcher and a team of lawyers sat across from Marcus Thorne. They came prepared to offer a multi-million-dollar settlement. Marcus held up a hand. "Mr. Fletcher, we appreciate the monetary offers, but let's be clear. Dr. Sterling doesn't need your money. What happened to her was an affront, but she sees it as a symptom of a deeper disease within your corporate culture. We are not here to get rich. We are here to demand change." He slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a settlement demand. It was a proposal. It called for a complete, top-to-bottom overhaul of the airline's diversity, equity, and inclusion training, to be designed and implemented by a third-party firm of Amaranthine's choosing. It demanded the establishment of an independent oversight committee to review all passenger discrimination complaints, and it required the funding of a multi-million-dollar scholarship program administered by a non-profit for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. Fletcher looked at the proposal. It would be expensive, difficult, and would require a public admission of systemic failure. But the alternative, a public lawsuit led by a beloved, self-made black female billionaire, complete with testimony from other victims and evidence of criminal behavior by their staff, would be corporate suicide. He looked at Marcus Thorne, a man who held all the cards. "We agree to your terms," Fletcher said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The press conference was staged in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, New York, a place where the air itself seemed to carry the weight of old money and new power. Banks of cameras formed a glittering wall, their lenses like 1,000 unblinking eyes. Journalists from every major news network, financial paper, and online outlet packed the room, a tangible buzz of anticipation crackling beneath the ornate chandeliers. This was not just another corporate apology. It was a public surrender. Thomas Fletcher, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways, approached the podium first. He looked smaller than he did in his corporate photos, his shoulders hunched inside his impeccably tailored suit. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white, and cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began, his voice strained but steady. He spoke of the airline's deep and profound regret, using carefully vetted phrases like unacceptable failure to uphold our values and a deep breach of trust. He announced the immediate termination of the two employees directly involved, Carla Jenkins and David Chen, and outlined the sweeping, systemic changes the airline had agreed to. He detailed the overhaul of their training programs and the establishment of the Independent Oversight Committee. He tried to frame it as a moment of growth, a chance for the airline to emerge stronger and more committed to its customers. But his words were hollow, the practiced contrition of a man trying to mitigate shareholder panic. The room was unmoved. Then Marcus Thorne introduced Dr. Alani Sterling. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. As Alani walked to the podium, a hush fell. She was not a defeated victim demanding retribution. She was a sovereign power dictating terms. Dressed in a striking cobalt blue dress that projected both serenity and strength, she exuded an aura of unshakable composure. She began not by speaking of the incident, but by speaking of flight itself. "Since the dawn of humanity," she said, her voice resonant and clear, "we have looked to the skies with a sense of wonder. Flight represents freedom, progress, the bridging of vast distances. It is a symbol of our highest aspirations. The ticket to board an aircraft should be more than a simple contract for passage. It should be a promise of safe and respectful travel for all, regardless of their background, their race, or their station. She then addressed the events at JFK, her gaze sweeping across the room, making eye contact with reporters. What I experienced at the hands of a transatlantic employee was not merely poor customer service. It was the weaponization of a uniform and title, fueled by a prejudice that has no place in our society, let alone in the global crossroads of an international airport. It was an attempt to diminish, to humiliate, and to enforce a baseless, hateful worldview. But what one person intends for harm, another can use for good. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. For that reason, I am not here today to celebrate a punishment, but to inaugurate a new beginning. Transatlantic Airways has agreed to a settlement of $10 million. However, not 1 cent of that money will go to me or my company. A murmur went through the crowd. Today, Alani announced, her voice ringing with purpose, I am proud to announce the formation of the Sterling Initiative, a foundation dedicated to funding STEM and aviation scholarships for students from underrepresented communities. This $10 million will serve as its seed money. We will turn an act of exclusion into a new generation of inclusion. We will ensure that the brilliant minds that will design the next generation of aircraft, that will pilot them, that will lead the companies that build them, reflect the beautiful, diverse world they serve. She concluded, we cannot always control the prejudice we face, but we can absolutely control our response. Our response today is not anger, but ambition, not revenge, but reform. We are not just closing a chapter of ugliness, we are writing a new book of opportunity. During the Q&A, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal asked a pointed question. Mr. Fletcher, critics might say this is just an expensive PR move, that a corporate culture of bias can't be fixed with a check and a new training manual. How can you guarantee real change? Fletcher began to offer a practiced corporate response, but Alani stepped forward slightly. If I may, she interjected gently. Change is not guaranteed by a press conference. It is guaranteed by vigilance. The independent oversight committee we have established will be that vigilance. My legal team will be that vigilance. And most importantly, the new generation of diverse leaders funded by the initiative, who will one day be sitting in your boardrooms and in your cockpits. They will be the guarantee. Change is coming to this industry, Mr. Fletcher. The only question was whether Transatlantic would be an architect of that change or a casualty of it. They have, wisely, chosen the former. The room was silent for a beat, then erupted in a flurry of camera flashes. The message was clear. Alani Sterling had not just won, she had reshaped the battlefield. For Carla Jenkins, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of a sterile courtroom. The public spectacle of the press conference was followed by the quiet, grinding misery of the justice system. Her union-appointed lawyer had been blunt. The evidence of the voucher fraud was an ironclad, open-and-shut case. The prosecution had emails, bank statements, and a sworn deposition from her sister, who had quickly made a deal to avoid charges herself. They're offering a plea deal, Carla, the lawyer had said, his tone weary. Grand larceny in the 3rd degree. You plead guilty, you get probation, community service, and you pay full restitution. You go to trial, they'll add the computer fraud charges, and with the high-profile nature of this case, the DA will make an example of you. You'll do jail time. It's your choice. She sat at the defendant's table, a grey, diminished figure. She saw the faces in the jury box, a cross-section of the city she'd lived in her whole life. and saw only condemnation. She thought of the cold finality of a jail cell. The choice was no choice at all. "Guilty," she mumbled when the judge asked for her plea. The word tasted like poison. The sentencing was swift. 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a restitution order for $80,500 to be paid to Transatlantic Airways. Her 401k, which she had cashed out to pay for her mounting legal bills, was already gone. The restitution order meant any future wages she earned would be garnished. She was financially ruined, but the true collapse happened not under the gavel of a judge, but across the worn laminate of her own kitchen table. Her husband, Jim, a man whose life had been a quiet routine of work at the local hardware store and evenings in front of the TV, finally broke his silence. "I read about the press conference," he said, not looking at her. "I saw what she's doing, building something. And you stole from your own company, Carla. You lied to me. But that's not even the worst of it." He finally looked up, and she was shocked by the raw pain in his eyes. "The things they said you did, the things you said to people. That agent, the young one who gave a statement. She said you called people urban ones. All these years, Carla. Was that who you were? Was that hate inside you this whole time? It was just talk, airport talk. You don't understand the stress, the people you have to deal with," she cried, her voice cracking. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I understand just fine. I understand that you humiliated a woman for no reason other than the color of her skin. You looked at a success and saw a threat. I can live with a mistake, Carla. I can live with a bad decision. But I can't live with that kind of hate. I don't even know who you are anymore." That night, he packed a bag. The house went on the market a month later to cover their debts. Carla was left with a few $1,000s and a future as bleak and empty as a winter sky. She found a small, dreary apartment in a town 100 miles away where her name meant nothing. The only job she could get was on a night shift cleaning crew for a commercial office park. The karma for David Chen was quieter, but no less absolute. Fired for gross negligence, he found every door in the aviation industry slammed in his face. His name was now synonymous with a catastrophic management failure. After 6 months of fruitless searching, he took a job as the night manager at a budget motel off the I-95 corridor in Delaware. Every night, he would stand outside during his break, smoking a cigarette and watching the distant lights of planes on their final approach to Philadelphia International. Each one was a ghost of the life he had thrown away, a reminder that his failure was not in one single act, but in 1,000 small moments of cowardice, of looking the other way, of choosing the easy path of inaction rather than the difficult one of responsibility. A year later, the first class of the Sterling Initiative Scholars was announced. At a ceremony held at the New York Hall of Science, 25 brilliant, hopeful students from all backgrounds were awarded full scholarships. One of them, a young woman from the Bronx named Maria Rodriguez, who dreamt of being an aerospace engineer, gave a speech. "I used to look at the sky and see a barrier," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A world I could never reach. The Sterling Initiative didn't just give me a scholarship. It gave me a new horizon. Because of Dr. Sterling's vision, a door that was closed to me has been thrown wide open." Alani watched from the front row, a genuine smile on her face. The memory of the JFK incident had faded. It no longer sparked anger, only a detached sense of a catalyst. The ugly moment had been transmuted into this beautiful one. Her company's Alzheimer's treatment, NeuroClarity, was now changing lives around the world, and the Sterling Initiative was changing futures. She had taken an act of profound disrespect and used its energy to create a legacy of respect. On a cold, grey Saturday afternoon, Carla Jenkins was fulfilling her community service hours. She was assigned to a roadside cleanup crew along a bleak stretch of industrial parkway. Dressed in a flimsy orange vest over her threadbare coat, she stabbed at discarded fast food wrappers and empty cigarette packs with a long metal claw. Her hands were numb, her back ached, and the wind whipped at her face, carrying the smell of exhaust and decay. A low roar began to build, and she looked up. A private jet, a gleaming white Gulfstream, was on its final approach to a nearby executive airport. It sliced through the clouds, a breathtaking vision of speed, wealth, and freedom. She froze, the trash picker still in her hand, and watched it. She no longer felt the hot flash of resentment she once might have. The bitterness was still there, a cold stone in her gut, but it was now overlaid with a profound and hollow emptiness. She had spent 30 years as a gatekeeper to a world of privilege. Her small power came from her ability to make snap judgments, to sort the worthy from the unworthy, based on her own warped criteria. She had looked at Dr. Alani Sterling and seen a fraud, an anomaly who didn't fit her narrow picture of who belonged in first class. She never once considered that the woman might not just belong in the seat, but that she might own the very sky the plane flew through. The jet lowered its landing gear, a graceful and precise maneuver, before disappearing behind a line of trees. The sound of its engines faded, leaving only the lonely whistle of the wind. Carla stood motionless for a long time. Her prejudice had been a fortress she thought kept her safe, that gave her a sense of superiority. But in the end, it had only been a prison. And as she looked at her reflection in a grimy puddle of roadside water, a tired, anonymous woman in an orange vest, she finally understood. Dr. Sterling was flying to new heights, building a better world from the ashes of Carla's hate. And she was here, on the ground, left with nothing but the garbage. It was a karma so complete, so fitting, it was almost poetic. She bent down, the fight finally gone from her eyes, and picked up another piece of trash. And so, Carla Jenkins's story serves as a stark and powerful reminder that the choices we make, especially those fueled by prejudice, have consequences that can ripple out in the most unexpected and devastating ways. She thought she was wielding the small power of a gate agent, but she was standing in the path of a force of nature. Dr. Alani Sterling, on the other hand, shows us the true meaning of power. Not just the wealth to own a private jet, but the wisdom and grace to turn a moment of profound disrespect into an engine for systemic change, lifting others up instead of just striking back. What did you think of the karma Carla received? Was it a just outcome for her actions? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every story like this is a conversation, and your voice is a crucial part of it. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true life stories of drama, justice, and the powerful twists of fate. Thank you for listening.